So welcome everyone to this Battle of Ideas session, which carries the question, does Britain have a gambling problem? A lot of Battle of Ideas panel discussions aren't as polarised as this one, don't provoke as strong opinions amongst a lot of people. And I think our panel today is representative, the fact that people are on both sides of this discussion, but then there's also people in the middle. So hopefully we have a rowdy, quite fiery discussion, but at the end that we all remain friends. So the reason why I decided to put on this discussion was because I'm a bit torn on the issue myself. So on one hand, I personally have many vices. Gambling isn't one of them. But I've always thought that people should be free and allowed to make their own decisions, even if they're stupid decisions with their money. And that we shouldn't vilify and look down upon people who do gamble. That being said, I am of the demographic where gambling is most popular. I'm a young male, and a lot of my friends do gamble, an incredible amount actually. And I was quite surprised when I was told that one of my friends who has never been interested in football, never watched a football match, began to start betting on Norwegian second division football games, often quite high sums. Unsurprisingly, he didn't win any money, and I thought he was an idiot for doing this. So I come from both positions. On one hand, philosophically, I'm completely behind gambling, but on the other hand, I think a lot of people who do gamble are stupid idiots who should use their money better.
So he's the West Ham fan, is that right?
Yeah, fortune's always hiding. So hopefully this panel will help me to decide a bit further how to develop my mixed emotions on this topic, hopefully help you guys decide, but also give you guys a chance to contribute to a public discussion, which I think we need to have, and I don't think we have enough. So undoubtedly the gambling industry's presence has grown amongst the public. The rise of advertising, the invention of online gambling has meant that gambling seems something more present in society and perhaps more accepted than it was maybe 40 or 50 years ago. We have shops on the high street now, whereas they used to perhaps be in different places, couldn't get that level of real estate. And there seems to be regular media panics about gambling problems, people killing themselves because of gambling addiction, and rather inflationary, surprising statistics, which sometimes seem baffling and sometimes seem quite concerning. But then we also have positive stories about gambling. So Leicester winning the Premier League last year provoked loads of media stories where punters had won amazing amounts of money. And in that regard, we thought gambling was perhaps a good thing and a nice, happy story. So hopefully our panelists can hit the nail on the head and sort of reveal to you a bit more than I just have then. So let's go over and meet them. So speaking first, we have Malcolm George, who's Chief Executive Officer at the Association of British Bookmakers, who are partnering with us on this session and who we're very grateful for making it happen. Malcolm's been a lobbyist for a long time, speaks regularly on the radio, and is very eloquent and articulate, hence why we wanted to have him involved.
Oh, cry.
Speaking second, on the far left, perhaps of the political spectrum, maybe we'll find out, is John Crowley. He's Editor-in-Chief of International Business Times, who have been one of our media partners on the festival, put out some really good articles right into a lot of the sessions. So definitely go and check out International Business Times because they do some great work. He's previously digital editor at the Wall Street Journal for Europe, Middle East and Africa, and he's worked as a reporter for the Daily Mail, Telegraph and the Irish Post as well. And then back on my right, we have Hilary Salt, who's actuary founder of First Actuarial. Based up in Manchester, she runs their office there. Hilary's incredibly smart, chaired one of my battle panels last year. Couldn't think of a better person to have on this panel. She's very interested and has some great thoughts on gambling, so looking forward to hearing from her. And then next to me, we've got Mark Littlewood. He's Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs. The Institute of Economic Affairs have published some really good stuff on gambling, trying to bust some misconceptions which are out there in the media. And I think they've done a good job on that. And last but certainly not least, over here is Professor Jim Orford. He's emeritus professor of clinical and community psychology at the University of Birmingham. He's also the founder of Gambling Watch UK and author of Powerlessness and Addiction. He's wrote a number of books, very insightful, very eloquent books on gambling and addiction more broadly. He actually gave us a sneak peek of a chapter from his new book, which is on the session readings for this debate. So do go online and check that out because you'll see it before anyone else does. So that's all our panellists. So I've asked our speakers to give brief opening remarks answering the question quite directly of does Britain have a gambling problem? Malcolm, you're up first. Do you want to kick us off?
So answer the question directly. Yes, Britain does have a gambling problem. You can't look at any survey, health surveys, and not see that over the last 15, 20 years, consistently about between 0.5%, 1% of the adult population can be identified as probably an addicted or problem gambler. That's not to suggest there's 1% of the population in some gambling den. It's more likely the case that people get treatment, people get support from families and move out from being addicted problem gamblers. But worryingly, there is a cohort who move into the group pretty much as one drops out, one drops in. The numbers haven't moved. It's 1.1% in Wales, 0.7% I think in Scotland, 0.5% in England. The numbers stay there. They always stay in that range. They don't move. We have a gambling problem. What we do as an industry is provide support where we can. We need to do more. We have to start identifying the group that are moving into problem gambling, and we have to support those who are already addicted. That's what has to happen. So there's the answer. You've paid your money to come here, so I ought to probably bang on a little longer. I suppose the question is, if yes, there is a problem, there is an issue of problem gambling, is it a big problem? Is it significant? I think, I want to say, if you are touched or know of or have been a problem gambler or addicted gambler, the consequences to the individual are pretty dire. It'll lead to financial penury quite often, loans, breakdown of relationships. Anyone associated with a problem gambler will suffer significant trauma and harm. It is an exceptionally grim affliction. And we can't and shouldn't shy away from it. I suppose then the question around problem gambling is, where's it rate relative to other vices or problems? Is it especially commonplace or especially prevalent? That's where I think the issues start to arise. If you look at dependency on alcohol from very similar surveys, you're talking about 6% of the population probably. Problems with illegal drugs, somewhere around 4% of the population. You look at obesity, 26% of the adult population. So, yes, it's a problem. Yes, its effects are serious. But relative to other areas that we should be concerned with, other areas potentially for public policy, it is a relatively low prevalence. I then think if you look at the nature of the problem, how does it affect society? And I've outlined to you the very real problems that come from gambling addiction. But does it hit the health service like alcohol? Does it tie up police time like Friday and Saturday nights chucking out time at the pubs? Does it tie up potentially health resources as obesity does? Its secondary and ancillary effects are actually awful but relatively narrow compared to many of the other areas we consider in the vices. So, do we need to do more? Well, as an industry, about 90% of the funding for gambling charities, problem gambling treatment. The NHS problem gambling clinic is 80% funded by the industry. We do an awful lot. Are there big queues, long waiting times for these charities? They're not ideal, but they're not especially noticeably bad. The industry does a huge amount, and I believe we have significant structures in place to ensure signposting and other areas. The one thing I would say is, if you think there's a problem, the one thing please don't do is start reaching for the banning orders. What's apparent to me is, if you start looking at banning elements of gambling, you simply switch problems. If you ban regional casinos, people will go online. If you ban fob teas, people will go in the amusement arcades. The reality is you need a system that treats the individual, identifies the person likely to have a problem, identifies them early, and gets them into the treatment they need. So we have a gambling problem. We all, I believe, should accept there is one. What we need to do is acknowledge its scale, divert, if necessary, more resources, but fundamentally accept it for the relatively low scale but truly concerning problem that it is.
John, do you want to come back to that?
Yes, thank you very much. As said at the start, I'm the editor of the International Business Times here in the UK, and no doubt our site in terms of programmatic ads has run gambling ads on its site before, but I'm going to try and speak in personal capacity here today. My father is 71. It's pretty much to say for the last 50 years of his life he's gambled pretty much every day or every other day during the course of his life. And I'm not about to kind of paint some kind of terrible picture of how my dad's gambling habit split up our family or made us homeless. He's kind of a sort of a functioning gambler where he likes to have a little flutter each day. And I was kind of asking myself the question, I was just talking there with Jim just before briefly, just saying, does my dad have a kind of a gambling problem? And on many levels people would say yes, but actually thinking about it, you know, I would say he'd be in that kind of grey amorphous area, you know. And the problem is, having a gambling problem, what is termed as a serious gambling problem, is always subjective. But my point to the question, does Britain have a gambling problem? I would say yes, but I think we can tweak that question slightly. Does Britain have a growing gambling problem? And this is where I would disagree with Malcolm. The answer is yes. The Gambling Commission has said that, I think we're going to be have statistics and damn statistics thrown at us during this debate, but it has grown in the last 3 years. I think nearly doubled from 0.3% to 0.7% of the population. That's about 330,000 people, which it would be similar to the size of Cardiff. But as Malcolm acknowledges, that ripple effect impacts on other people's lives, whether they're wives, husbands, sons, daughters, grandparents. The number of people aged 18 to 24 with a gambling problem, according to the Gambling Commission, has trebled to 1.5%. So if this was a kind of a disease or infection, there would be a huge national debate about this. But very often, gambling affliction is something that's hidden. You don't exhibit any physical symptoms. It's very much taboo, and it has an insidious impact on people's lives. And very often, it is classless, but it impacts on the poor and vulnerable who turn to these ways of trying to make money. So, listen, I don't want to sound like a fun sponge here. I'm not kind of advocating that we should kind of do away with gambling. I went to Ascot during the summer. I had a very good time. Made a bit of money out of you, actually, out of your industry, Malcolm. And for a recent significant birthday, I went to Wimbledon Dogs and we had a great time. For me, the big issue, and this is where this is something that we can address, and where, again, I would disagree with you, Malcolm, where, something needs to be done, is the proliferation of gambling ads during live sporting events, such as football. I was watching the cricket this morning, and, during one, gap in one of the overs, there was another gambling ad, and that was at 11 o'clock this morning. And just to bring it full circle, I was watching it with my 2 kids. And what I'm worried about is that proliferation of gambling ads now that we see on our televisions is normalising gambling for young children when they don't even realise it. So as adults, we can all make our own mistakes. We can all, put aside some money and have some fun. Or we can, spunk our wages up against the wall and, develop a gambling problem. But for children being impacted by these gambling ads, that is something that we can do about, and that is something that we can regulate. And the past Labour administration has been responsible for many things, but one of the pernicious things, I think, that it did bring into force was the Gambling Act of 2005, which was enacted in 2007, which kind of basically opened this up, these gambling ads that now appear. It's live football games and it's bingo. You're allowed to do it pre-watershed. Between 2005 to 2012, the number of ads jumped by 1,400%. While we're trying to regulate other addictions like cigarette advertising, we don't see that now at sporting events. Sugary drinks, that's banned. You're banned from showing them during children's TV programs. Or alcohol. It seems to have gone completely the other way in terms of online gambling. I don't want my children to be, to have this impacted upon. I don't want them to be in Play with Ray, okay? That famous ad with Ray Winstone. Actually, incidentally, it's not Jude Law who's advertising those ads. It's the authentic Cockney working class geezer Ray Winstone who's doing that. And that is something we can do.
So thank you, John. Hilary.
Okay, so I'm going to perhaps argue slightly on the other side and argue that I'm not sure at all that Britain does have a gambling problem, but I do think that gambling may well have a Britain problem. In other words, gambling has a problem with the way that we as a society now treat it. So let me set out why I believe that. So I believe there are 4 things we should think about and perhaps need to come back to in the discussion. The first thing I would make is I think we have in this country allowed gambling to coarsen sport, both for spectators and for players. Secondly, I think in Britain we use gambling as an outlet for the kind of worst kind of sneering snobbery, which I think should have no place in our discourse. Third, I think we have allowed ideas from gambling to colonise more and more areas of our lives, and I think that's corrosive. And fourthly, I think our attitude to gambling is a bit of a symptom of what I'd call the hollowing out of shared recreation. So that all sounds very highfalutin, and I'm going to kind of perhaps try and explain what I mean by that in more practical terms. So on the idea of the coarsening of sport, I do worry, I share the concerns already expressed that sport is being reorganised around the needs of betting. I'm not sure that's gambling's fault. I think that's potentially sport's fault. But anybody who's... I'm not a great watcher of sport on TV outside of football, but I think anybody who's listened to Talk Sport, and I quite often am reduced to the indignity of listening to Talk Sport. And if you do that, you'll know that the commentary on the match is now littered with asides on whether to back out of specific bets or place in-bet games. And certainly for me, in-game betting has ruined lots of nights out as friends have spent the night opening and closing bets on their phone. That is an issue, but whether it's an issue from gambling or from the way that we interact with each other, I think is the question. And I agree with the point Adam made earlier that phone bettors are, in my experience, usually people who know absolutely nothing about football. They don't see the beautifully balanced chip or the fantastically timed run. They only really care about the current odds on Rooney scoring, odds that are getting longer and longer, obviously, by the day. In my view, bets on things that other than the result of a game are really a problem. And in some ways, that's because I think if you look at it from the point of view of players, players can certainly be involved in the kind of betting that doesn't need them to commit that ultimate sin of throwing a match. And we've seen in the past that temptation was too much for cricketers in the 2010 spot fixing scandal. But I think the recognition of that has resulted, certainly, I know in football, in banning all players from placing any bets on anything related to football anywhere in the world. So people who have Stoke's Bet365 Stadium as their place of work are unable to use Bet365 to place any bets on football. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? But I would say that building a sports relationship with its participants on a foundation of mistrust is part of what I would call the coarsening of sport. And it's a coarsening of sport that we've allowed to happen. I don't think we should just be pointing our finger at the bookmakers. Let me come on then to snobbery. So on snobbery, I think the problem for Britain is that we have used gambling as a divisive issue. And I think the boundaries are often porous, but there are some levels of good gambling, premium bonds, the National Lottery and its good causes sometimes, skill games are generally in the good box, and then there's bad gambling. So the fixed odds betting terminals, online betting of all kinds is generally put in the bad box, and many chance games. Now, my actuarial skills tell me that those distinctions are not really based on relative odds, although that might be the way it's portrayed by people commenting on it, but they are based on who is playing. And there are indeed very different reactions to the way that people might treat a big win. Blowing winnings on a big blowout is seen as a particular problem of working people. You might remember the example of Harry Hardcastle in Love on the Dole, where you saw that for people who have no real belief that things will improve in the future, spending a win on the horses on a once-only holiday is, I would say, very difficult to criticise. Can I say one other thing, which is just that I'm really worried about the colonisation of ordinary life by gambling. So a banal example is Halifax's Savers prize draw. Other saving vehicles are available, where the problem of low interest rates for savers is being resolved by bringing in gambling ideas into the saving community. And I think, that kind of the way that gambling is encroaching on all other elements of our life is a problem, but that is not a problem of the gambling industry.
Thank you, Hilary. So, Mark.
Well, my name's Mark, and I'm a problem gambler. I think according to GamCare's 7, or it might be the Gambling Commission's 7 criteria of what constitutes a problem gambler, I certainly exhibit 5 of them. I gamble about 10% of my disposable income every year, which is quite a lot of money, and I love it. The upside for me is the last 5 years I've been a profitable gambler, so all of the other issues actually somewhat diminish and fall by the wayside. Nobody knows the Bournemouth Spurs score, do they? I've had to switch my mobile phone off, but that's probably 40 quid I'm not seeing again. I gamble on virtually every Premier League match, virtually every weekend, and I enjoy it. I can afford it, and I think I am, in that sense, a normal gambler, even if categorised as a compulsive or problem gambler. Far from gambling coarsening sport, if I'm addicted to gambling, I am most certainly addicted to football. I would watch Norwegian second division games if they are on television. I watch, I should think, at least 10 live football matches a week, 9 on television, my own team about once a week live. And if it is a particularly boring game in which I have no skin in the game because my team is not playing or affected, by putting a tenner on the result, massively adds to the excitement. I held no torch for Bayer Leverkusen or Tottenham Hotspur, who ground out the dullest of dull 0-0 draws last week. I would have died of boredom if I'd not had 20 quid on the result. I bet on there being less than 1.5 goals, so I was also pleased with the result. None of this strikes me as problematic at all. And I think that we sometimes ring-fence off gambling and talk probably too much about football and horse racing, instead of blending it in with a whole range of other activities that we do in our ordinary lives, which are in no ways vices. I'm a long odds bettor, typically, and I'll tell you now, every year I put a £200 bet on odds of 2,500 to 1, that my house is going to burn down and all of my contents will be destroyed in it. If that eventuality happens, I will get a £50,000 payout. That is an insurance policy, but it is a bet. It is hedging a risk. And I think that our strategy should be, I agree with what Malcolm said at the outset, if you like, in technical terms, there is a problem, i.e. you can identify a number of people who have a gambling problem. But if that's going to be our definition of a problem, I think then Britain is just beset by problems on virtually everything. You'll find people who are addicted to all sorts of strange things and that causes them problems in their lives. And I think our strategy should be to normalise this activity, not to denormalise it. When I was 14 years old, I opened a book at school on the 1986 World Cup. I learnt more from being a bookmaker than I learnt in any maths lessons at school. If people were putting too much money on Argentina at 3 to 1, I had to cut the odds and offer more attractive odds on other countries to win in order to balance my books. It was a normalised, normal activity. I encourage my 9-year-old nephew to bet on football such that he understands risk-reward ratios. If he wants to put his £1 pocket money on a particular outcome and it doesn't happen, then he is a loser. I think that we should treat gambling, taking risks, chasing rewards, hedging possible outcomes. If I've been particularly concerned that my own team, Southampton Football Club, might be relegated, such would be the blow to my morale and happiness that it's quite tempting for me to put £1,000 on them to be relegated, such that I will have a cash payout to soften the blow were that to happen to them. So I think we need to normalise gambling, and I think if we take it away from schools and are terribly worried about kids watching Ray Winston in the middle of Sky Sports, we are in danger of making it a naughty and attractive activity rather than a mathematical enterprise. I think that we could probably begin to tackle people's complex relationship with it if we put it actually closer into society. I think card games should be encouraged in schools rather than typically banned, perhaps not for money, but in order to teach people risks and rewards. So I don't accept that there is a gambling problem other than the literal sense that it is a human activity that people suffer from, but that applies to virtually all human activities. I think our strategy should be to normalise it. I think we should also on occasions celebrate it. Using your money in an attempt to predict the future and get rewards if you succeed in doing so, to hedge risks that you face, strikes me as an entirely natural human thing that can bring you joy and reward, which we very little talk about, only focus on the risk. So I would encourage schools to teach people about gamblings and rewards and rates of returns, and I think if we did that and normalised it across society, actually the problem that afflicts hundreds of thousands, not millions of people, would diminish, not increase.
Thank you, Mark. And Jim?
Yes, is the answer to the question. Britain has a very serious gambling problem, and it comes in 3 parts. The first part is the personal and family part, and you've heard a bit about that already from John and others. But just to address 1 or 2 of the remarks been made already, Malcolm says, yes, we have a problem, but it's not a big problem. If 1% or nearly 1% of the population has a serious problem, that is a major public health problem. Any public health expert will tell you that something is that prevalence is something to be taken very seriously. And I don't know where Malcolm got his figures from about drug problems, but the European Drug Monitoring Centre says that Britain's rate of problems related to illicit drugs is actually of very much of the same order as gambling problems. We reckon something between 1/3 and 500,000 adults in Britain have a clearly recognised gambling problem, and that doesn't include the grey area. That probably doesn't include your father, and there's a big grey area here as well. But that is a very significant problem that we have to take seriously, and it is no joke. And as already been said, it is a highly distressing thing to have an addiction problem, and it is now recognised as an addiction along with other addictions. And the way I look at addiction is that it's a very disempowering experience. If you've ever been addicted to something and you can't give up something that is causing you or your family real hardship, you feel very disempowered. And that feeling of disempowerment ripples out to the rest of the family. So if you're a son or if you're a wife, you feel very disempowered by having somebody in your family who's got this very serious problem. I have a website called Gambling Watch UK, and every few days somebody puts a comment up on my website talking about their own problems of gambling, often with the fixed odds betting terminals that we now find in high street betting shops. Often comments from family members talking about how disempowered they feel and how worried they feel about their son, daughter, father, mother, whoever it is. So this is a very serious problem, and it's no joke. That's the first bit. The second bit of the problem that Britain has is something to do with what it's doing to our high streets and the centres of our towns. And it's no accident that one of the main groups that is worried about the problem that Britain has currently are local authority representatives and officers. And the Local Government Association currently is, I think it's 90 at the last count, local authorities who are asking the government if they will do something about the lack of diversity in their high streets, which are being caused by the proliferation of betting shops, and particularly the fixed odds betting terminals, which are basically our casino games like roulette. Used to have to go to a casino to play them. Now you can play them on a machine very fast. Every few seconds you can put money and play these machines, causing absolute havoc for people who are getting addicted to them and their families. So it's what it's doing to our high streets and to the quality and diversity of what's going on in the centres of our towns, which is the second area that I would want to draw attention to. The third area is really more political. You've mentioned already the 2005 Gambling Act, which is the main act that controls basically the regulation and the rules about gambling at the moment. Before 2005, basically the attitude which we had in this country and which the government took was that gambling was not an ordinary commodity. It wasn't to be thought of as just a business opportunity. It was something we've always recognised to be potentially dangerous. I mean, if you look at British history, the history of the aristocracy in Britain is littered with people who lost their homes, lost their fortunes. The Salvation Army at the other end of the scale, when the Salvation Army started in the Victorian era, one of the things it was concerned about was gambling amongst the poor, amongst the working classes. So you've got the two bits of the British social spectrum and all in between. We've always recognised it's dangerous, but the 2005 Act basically said no, gambling is to be seen as a business opportunity. This was the new Labour government who fell over themselves to be cooperative with industry. This was to be a business opportunity. Hence the proliferation of betting shops on the high street, because now you don't have to demonstrate, as you used to before 2005, that there was unmet demand. All you have to say is, yeah, we want to set up another betting shop. So if you look at the poorer parts of London, poorer parts of other cities now, you can go, one betting shop after another, often a pawnbroker shop in between or a payday loan shop in between. So people are now getting fed up. They're getting fed up with the gamblification of sport and the sportification of gambling, as somebody referred to it as. They're fed up with all the advertisements. People with children are fed up with the fact that they're exposed to advertisements before the 9 o'clock watershed. People who are getting into trouble with internet gambling are fed up with the way in which the internet companies constantly try and induce you to take out a contract with them, and even if you tried to self-exclude, they want to get you back in by constantly bombarding with adverts. So that's the third part and the political part. And just finally, Malcolm was very proud of the fact that the gambling industry actually funds treatment, and they also fund all the research. That's nothing for Britain to be proud of, that the provider industry is the actual industry that's got its hands on our research. We are now losing our best research talent to overseas. A lot of universities will not engage in gambling research. My university won't, because there's a conflict of interests involved.
Thank you, Jim. So now I'm going to offer a few questions to the panel, just to sort of get the discussion going. This is meant to be free-flowing, so grab my attention if you want to speak, you want to argue with someone. So I'm going to go straight over to Malcolm. Something which keeps coming up is the snobbery point, or good versus bad gambling. And then Jim brought up the fixed odd betting terminals, which of course get a lot of bad press. How do you see this? Do you see it as the politics of pity? Do you see it as a problem?
I mean, quite a few elements in what Jim said, just don't ring true, unfortunately. I mean, the reality is betting shop numbers are down, and the idea that we crowd out boutique boulangeries with our betting shops is frankly farcical. There is the high street. The reason you see bookies now is they've moved from side streets onto the high street because rents are down, because high streets are failing, and bookmakers contribute to getting a footfall on the high street like few other shops do, and that's the reality of it. He talks about Newham Council and its protests. Well, if we're such a plague on high streets, how come Newham's got the highest house price growth of any borough in London? I mean, it just isn't the case. As opposed, FOBTs are there. They are, people talk about casinofication. The opportunities to gamble, you can go into a bookies, and a FOBT has a maximum stake of 100 quid, a maximum prize 500 quid. You can go in the Hippodrome at the West End, no security checks, no ID checks. You can do £5,000 on a spin of a roulette wheel. You can go online, you can do 5 to 10 grand. The idea, there is an absolute snobbery that somehow people who use betting shops aren't fit to make financial decisions, yet little Lord Fauntleroy who walks into the casino can blow his inheritance and there's less to worry about. It's not the case. It's acknowledge and accept there is a core of problem gamblers. Try to identify them, try to treat them, but the vilification of certain products, the not allowing bookmakers to, that somehow we're going to survive just offering horse racing and dogs. You're going to kill an industry, and you're going to give it. You're not going to solve anyone's problem. You're just going to move people online, and you're going to move them to casinos and amusement arcades.
So, Jim, do you take those words to be true?
Not at all, no. I mean, that's what you'd expect. As I say, the gambling industry basically has got its fingers in all the pies, really. There's no... as an academic, I like to go to conferences where, research results are presented and things are debated and so on. The only conference now in Britain that we have is run by the gambling industry. It's the Responsible Gambling Trust, which is an industry-led body, which now runs the single national conference on drugs.
We don't stop anyone holding a conference. We create opportunities like this for you to speak as well.
You would expect the Association of British Bookmakers to take the line that Malcolm is taking. It's exactly what you'd expect. We don't have a problem. It's all snobbery. It really isn't. We do have a serious problem. We really do.
Okay, Hilary.
I just wanted to, if you don't mind, Mark, just take up you had a kind of romantic view. It came across to me about betting. So, I would say that what we might have once thought of as betting, so going to the races, playing poker with your friends, I mean, even going to a kind of smoke-filled betting shop on a Saturday afternoon, as I remember, used to happen when, not myself, but, you used to walk past it when I was a kid. All that kind of collective form of gambling has been replaced with a very individual relationship. So, you betting against a market maker on your phone, and there's been quite a few exposés of how you're not getting very good odds on that basis. The kind of teenager playing online poker in their bedroom, those kind of isolating experiences that to me kind of degrade the kind of excitement that you were portraying of betting and winning and losing in front of your friends. And I guess I would just challenge you: has there not been a kind of hollowing out of what was once a kind of shared recreation of betting?
Just 2 points. In my experience, no. So, I mean, I would place nearly all of my bets via Betfair Exchange, as they typically give the best odds unless there's a promotion. I do all of that on my mobile phone, I think effectively without limit. So whether or not Betfair have any shops on the high street, they don't. It's neither here nor there. And because everybody else has a mobile phone and most people are interested in football, a good proportion of them like to bet, it is a conversation piece down the pub. So just before whatever, Man United versus Fenerbahce comes on, I think United are about to score 3 and somebody will disagree with me and say, I don't think so, they haven't been able to put the ball in the back of the net. I'm going to bet that it's going to be a 1-1 draw, and it's a trigger for discussion. The mere fact that we have a mobile phone in our hand doesn't isolate the experience. It's not my job to stand up for the industry, on my second point, by the way, but from what I heard, Malcolm accepted there was a problem and that the industry is making some investment to solve it. And I don't find a conflict of interests in that regard. I would expect industries to behave that way. I would expect in the same fashion the car industry to be interested in car safety. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people die in Britain every year in motor accidents or get injured. I'm not appalled that car manufacturers are looking at ways to make their cars safer, and I would rather hope that the car industry is investing in conferences and research to make sure when a car smashes into a wall there's less chance you're going to break your leg. I would be absolutely amazed if university researchers were saying, how dare the car industry poison our independent research with attempts to keep their customers alive. So I take exactly the same view of the bookies industry. They've accepted there's a problem. They are trying to address that problem, and I would expect respected and reputable businesses, be they the gambling industry, the motor car industry, or any other kind of industry, which has, as I say, generally brings about much good in the world, but has this ancillary effect, to be investing in solving that ancillary effect.
You're comparing apples and oranges.
Well, I'd like the tobacco industry to find a cure for cancer.
If you get in a car and you drive it and there's something wrong with it, then you can sue the car maker for safety procedures. When you lose money on gambling, unfortunately, you can't sue the bookies for losing your money.
That's not right. It's not to do with the car failing. It's if you idiotically smash your car into a wall at 40 miles an hour, or 60 miles an hour.
People don't always idiotically
Right,
smash
idiotic
their cars,
driving is being mitigated by car industry research. That is a good thing. Airbags and the like. The design of the car is such you're less likely to be injured. That's irrespective of whether the wheel falls off and you sue the car manufacturer. Irresponsible driving is now less dangerous, thanks to car industry investment in safety. I would like to see the same happening in the gambling industry. I'd also like to see the tobacco industry find a cure for cancer.
Good luck with that. Okay.
John, so can I just pose you a question and then I'll let you in? So do you see gambling? So some people say that gambling is exchange of money for entertainment.
Yeah.
Do you think that holds true? Do you think there's any rationale to that, or is there something different?
Well, Mark seems to, make the case, and that's fair enough. I respect that. I think it's very brave of you to say that you're a successful gambler when you're sharing a platform with Malcolm. He might be sending a message to all the bookies to ban you from every single betting shop. Well, although you don't use it down the country. One thing that I wanted to. Yeah, I think if you're an adult and you enjoy it, fair enough. The point that I was trying to make before I got red carded was it's the normalisation. You argue that's in gambling is good, but I think that's bad for children. I think the glamorising, so you've got this in play with Rinstone, and the gamification of it, where you're playing a game, is wrong. I agree with you, Mark, that children should be taught in schools and it should be objectified, but I think having all these ads on at the moment during, Tottenham v Stoke, whatever, when my kids or other people's kids are watching, is a bad thing.
On the high street, represent the high street bookies, so the advertising area is primarily online. The subscription I pay to watch TV as a pleasure is subsidised effectively by the gambling industry. the money that created the Leicester result, that is spread around senior clubs and allows my club, Everton, to have better players, is funded by the gambling industry. I mean, at the end of the day, if there is a genuine and absolute concern it's an incredibly complex piece of technology. If you're sitting watching the TV with your kids and you're genuinely concerned they're being corrupted by gambling, then when it hits hard time, hit your pause button. Wait 15 minutes, fast forward through the ads and watch the second half. I mean, it's not...
You can't always be policing your children
better than
on
banning stuff. I mean, are we a society that says we can't have...
Is that fair enough? Post-watershed?
Pre-watershed.
Yeah, pre-watershed. No, but you can only see the adverts post-watershed, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Why not?
Why not?
Well, because I'll
How do
pay
you
more
defend
for
that?
my Sky subscription from
Sky
BT
subscription will
Sports. I'll pay more for Sky subscription for BT Sports. Racing will never be shown on the television because it's financially unviable without betting adverts. Basically, yeah.
But then you're putting the cart before the horse then, because we shouldn't be... Our enjoyment of football, albeit Mark enjoys it by gambling, and I enjoy to watch football, it shouldn't be governed by money that the gambling industry is putting into that.
But you'll have
and
to
this
pay
is the
more
problem
for
that
your
we're getting at.
subscription.
We are missing one person here on this panel, and that is someone from the government, from the regulators. So there's FOBTs, which are generating £500 million in revenues every year to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. They have a vested interest as well. This is why it's not been tackled, I think, and you would know this better than me, Jim, because revenue is coming into the Exchequer from all these gambling ads, and of course the broadcasters don't want to stop now because they depend on you as much as the problem gamblers depend on your sites.
Okay, so our audience is itching to get involved. It's meant to be a public conversation, so I'm going to take it out to them now.
I have experience of this. I've lived with somebody for 10 years who was a gambler. I've just supported a friend through 3 years of the most hellish, secretive addiction, mostly at night. A professional person who drinks and then gambles and finds himself addicted to trying to get rid of the debt. And also another friend who had a long period of time off work and found that a man with 3 children who gambled his house away, he'd lost his job as a teacher, being at home with just him and the computer. Now, what was true of all of these, that they were all men. They were all in middle age. They were all facing some sort of other crisis, some existential crisis, and I'd love to know statistics on age groups and gender. But the devastation of those lives was really, really, it's as bad as anything that I've known in other areas of people's desperately suicidal lives. What I think, so that's the subtext of what we're really talking about. Apart from we're talking about the high street and institutions, what goes on the telly, that's what's really going on for those people's personal lives. I think there's something as well about our national culture, and when I say culture, I mean our television culture, which is about winning. Every Saturday or whenever it is, strictly, people are gambling, not with money, but they're gambling on the outcomes. They're backing winners. X Factor. We have more game shows on our radios and on the telly than any other country in Europe. And the format is always about winning. So although there may not be money going into it, this is the total culture that we have about backing a winner. And I think that I would agree that we need to have some sort of conversation about that with kids in schools, about what it feels like to win and what it feels like to lose, and what you're prepared to risk in order to win. And that's why I think sports are so really important, because they cover all those emotional bases of loss, failure, humiliation, triumph, excitement. But I do think as well that we're losing the areas where people are finding that life is actually exciting. And so the excitement of those moments of gambling, the possibility of some life-changing moment, and pitching your intellectual power, particularly at night on the internet, gambling, poker, where it's you, not the event. You're talking about horse racing and things where you're not in control of that event. You're actually watching a game and betting on an outcome, but you're not. Other people are actually pitching their own capacities to win, And that's a very, very dangerous and difficult place to be. I don't know really what I'm saying in terms of a conclusion, but I just wanted to broaden out the kind of experiences that some people in the audience might understand.
My name's John, and just like the lady there, I guess it's difficult to kind of come to a conversation like this and not kind of share your personal experiences, because I think people have done so on the panel, and the lady has done there. I've played poker for most of my, well, in fact, all of my adult life, and before I was 18 as well. For me to go to a casino and play poker, it's a fairly straightforward thing to do. Some of the casinos I go to, you don't have to be a member; you can just walk in. Others, you have to be a member. One of the things that I don't want to go back to is a time when, I can't remember how many years ago it was, when if I wanted to go and play in a casino in another part of the country, I'd have to get an application form, I'd have to get it sent to me, and normally faxed. I don't know if people can remember faxes. I'd then have to complete it, send it off, make sure it got there 24 hours before I wanted to go and play. Because there used to be a notion in this country that you needed a 24-hour cooling-off period to actually gamble. And that was a ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous state of affairs. The idea that, you need a cooling-off period, as I said, it's just not the sort of thing. I'm glad we've kind of moved away from that. And my concern about discussions about problem gambling is that we will move into, that situation again. And I think... it's Malcolm, isn't it? I think Malcolm at the start said about the problem gamblers that there are, the percentages that there are, and I think made some very good comparisons with other problems that we have in society. You can see that there are people who are problem gamblers, and people will have their own personal experiences, and you read about them in the press every now and again. But in terms of the other problems that we have in society, I don't think there's any sort of comparison. As I said, I play poker not daily, not even weekly, but fairly regularly. I've got two daughters, 6 and 8. They know that I play poker. They ask me whether I win or not, and occasionally I play poker with them. And actually, that is a very good mechanism for them understanding that poker is a game that anyone can play. It gets them used to numbers. It gets them used to, the idea of working things out. And yes, I may have concerns about them watching adverts on the television, or actually anything. Watching the news on the television, I have to say, is a thing that I have to kind of police at times. But I think that's very much something us as adults have to kind of deal with. So if you've got kids watching betting adverts at 11 o'clock in the morning, you have to kind of, do what people have said and either like pause and forward at various points or whatever. But I do think that the idea that we've got so many restrictions on gambling means that we're going to have more kind of like legislation against it. I do have a concern about that, because I do not want to go back to a time, when you have to, this, as I said, this 24-hour cooling off period. Just one final point. A friend of mine's father passed away a couple of years ago, and he would always bet on the Grand National. And she was with her children and thought, actually, it would be good to bet on the Grand National, kind of memory to her dad and everything. But because she had her kids with her, she obviously wasn't able to kind of walk into a betting shop, and kind of do that. Now, I'm not saying that what I want to see is a situation where kids can like walk normally into a betting shop, but we are still at a situation where betting is restricted to certain people of a certain age. I'm not wanting to lower that at all, but the fact that the fact that there isn't this kind of normalisation of gambling, and the fact that there are times when gambling is just as someone said, I can't remember what said, there are certain types of gambling which are seen as a problem and not others. And I do, as I said, I do think there are issues with how things used to happen, and I wouldn't want to go back there at any other point in the future.
Yeah, hello, I'm Karen. I'm just wondering whether the snobbery observation is actually clouding the issue, because I've never actually thought of the betting shops as a snobbery thing, you know, whether or not you go into a betting shop or whether you gamble online. There's never been any differentiation for me. And it's like you either have a problem or you don't have a problem. And coming from, I'm the friend of a compulsive gambler, and he's had a problem for years. And, you know, we're talking about a psychological problem here. And I know that this started very early on in his life cycle. His mother was a compulsive gambler, and it was very tied up in his sort of ability to sort of please his mother. So she would go off and have a bet. He knew exactly where to find her any day of the week. She'd be in the betting shop. And it would depend on whether they had a good day or whether they had a bad day. It was all depending on whether or not they'd won a bet. The family had won a bet. So it became very much a family pastime. But not in a way that you would necessarily think was very healthy, because it became their life. And my friend, from the age of probably 8, and he actually says to me now he wouldn't change his life, because he's lost thousands of pounds, he's lost a house, he's almost lost his family, he's been to rock bottom, as they say in GA, you know, and out again many times, and has had this problem for maybe, I don't know, well, he's 55 now, and he's had it since he was 8. So it just kind of shows you the degree of it. It's insidious. It's always going to be there. He has to deal with it day by day. He's taking the 12 steps. But what I want to say is it is a psychological problem. I don't think by dressing it up and saying that there's, you know, betting shops, that there's a snobbery around that, and then it's okay to sort of, you know, have the high roller bets, that's okay. You know, maybe we're not saying that. We were talking about Littlewood, Lord Fauntleroy. But it's not about that, it's about the psychology behind it. And I think there are some very vulnerable people. The last thing I would want to do is to actually legitimise it I think there should be a watershed on times, to be honest. I think, or pre-watershed. I think for children to see this as normalising it, I don't think we ought to normalise it at all, really, because I don't believe, just taking in case in point my friend, it kind of became his life, and it's damaged him. It's really damaged him and disempowered him.
I mean, just to take up on that point, that your point, Malcolm, that, you know, parents should go and hit the pause button or switch over during advert breaks during the day, is risible, really. You know, that's the point of a watershed, so we don't have to worry that, you know, children are being potentially hit by, you know, violence and sex and gambling. Gambling should be included in that. Certainly the glamorisation of gambling. We've mentioned Mr. Winston, but also I see other ads like, you know, it's young men in a pub, you know, in play, and they just, you know, win just in time. They never lose, do they, in these ads? And so it's not just young children, it's kids in their teens. It's kind of 15-year-olds who can't gamble now. It's normalised to them now. By the time they hit 20, by the time they can go and legally gamble, you know, it feels normal for them. I don't know if Jim has any insight into that.
So let me take this guy, because he's been waiting for a while, and then we'll come back to the panel.
I think this has been a really interesting discussion on something that I personally, thankfully, unlike some other audience members, haven't been affected by. And it's something actually before today I hadn't really thought about, but it's been really thought-provoking. I think we've had a really good socio-economic discussion, and to a certain extent a legal discussion, but I wanted to pose 2 kind of devil's advocate moral questions, which you can discuss whoever wants to. Firstly, do you think that gambling in and of itself is a moral issue, or is it an issue which we simply have to deal with as a society and will always be there? And secondly, if there is a problem, I think most of the panel agreed that there was, to a certain extent, a problem with gambling in Britain. Do we as a society, and does the state, have a moral responsibility to intervene and act upon that and help people through it? Or is that up to the individual and their kind of individual social circles?
So a lot of points. We're going to come back to the panel. Regulation, addiction, morality. I'm going to throw in another one, risk. Is society now becoming so risk averse that anything that is a risk is completely off the table? Mark, I'm going to come to you first.
On this watershed point, I don't think we're quite there yet, but we will be within a year or 2. that you'll quite quickly be able to pick your own tolerance to what adverts you are willing to have broadcast in your home and which you are not. I don't have any children in my home, so I have no problem with Ray Winston popping up at half-time between Spurs and Stoke. First time I've ever heard Ray Winston described as glamorous, by the way. But if, and I'm sure this will come in very shortly in terms of technology, you know, if you don't want gambling adverts, perhaps for other reasons, you don't want alcohol adverts, for example, it will be quite easy to screen those out. You will have to pay more to watch Spurs versus Stoke than I will have to pay, because my advertising tolerance threshold is extremely low and yours is measurably higher. So you can expect your Sky Sports package to cost you 50 quid a month and mine to only cost me 30 quid a month. But you will be able to have and control those choices if you want to regulate the images that are broadcast into your own living room. And that will be easy to select in a similar way to you can wire up computers to wipe out particular images.
I support QPR, so I don't particularly
well,
watch them on the telly.
You probably want that banned in its own right. So that, but the stories we've heard about the problem issues, and they're obviously harrowing, and I haven't met anybody who's been into anything that sort of issue or problem. But I think what it comes back to are we right to assume in any way that these problems might have been avoided if there were only 2/3 as many bookmakers on Newham High Street and Ray Winston wasn't popping up at half-time on Sky Sports? I doubt it. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I doubt it. It doesn't seem to me that there is a dial back that is likely to, I don't think the number of problem gamblers are proportionate to the number of times that Ray Winston appears on Sky Sports. I think it's people who run into a range of other highly complex psychological problems. I'm not a psychologist. And that is one route which they go down. It could be that they other people follow a different path into alcoholism or drugs or whatever. So my question is, even though the problems are real and need to be dealt with, I don't think that we should assume from that necessarily that heavy-handed regulation or keeping it as a denormalised activity or making sure it isn't readily available on the high street would necessarily mitigate these problems. They would quite possibly just display themselves in another, conceivably even more intensive fashion, in which you're in less of a public arena by which to access help and assistance.
Let's let the psychologist on the panel come back on that.
Right, there's an awful lot there. I mean, whether it's a moral question, I think is a very interesting thing. But that's not where I'm coming from. I mean, I'm coming from the perspective that we have a problem which is a public health problem. But it's a public health problem like any other public health problem that we need to deal with. And I think it's both a personal and a political problem. And I think the people who've spoken movingly about individual gambling problems amongst their friends and relatives and so on, one of the things that regularly comes up in the comments that I receive on my website is the suicidal feelings that people experience. So these are not necessarily people who've obviously not people who've committed suicide successfully, they're not even people who've tried to commit suicide, but they're people who are regularly feeling suicidal because of the position that they're in. So it's a very real personal problem. It's of a psychological nature, as you say, but it's at the same time a political problem. And I think it's very interesting that Malcolm says that the gambling industry is really doing all it can to do something about this. But as soon as you're asked whether you'd be in favour of the watershed at 9, you say, oh, no, we wouldn't be in favour of that, all sorts of reasons. As soon as the gambling industry is asked, well, do we think the fixed odds betting terminals, the £100 at a time stake, that's one of the reasons they're so dangerous, is you can bet £100 every few seconds. Gambling industry, would you be in favour of doing something about that? No, not in favour of doing anything about that. So that is my point about the gambling industry being so powerful in the position that we have in Britain at the moment, that they are really a controlling influence on this. But it's being looked at. So that currently there is an all-party parliamentary group specifically looking at the position of fixed odds betting terminals. And I think there is a big swell of opinion about the advertising watershed and so on. And I do think this question about vested interests, I mean, Mark, as a man of the world, I do think you're really rather naive about this thing about because the car industry, the car industry is doing everything it can, to make cars safer. But the one thing the car industry won't do is anything that actually reduces the predominant position of the car and its use of petrol and diesel. And the same way, the gambling industry will be in favour of doing certain things, but it won't be in favour of doing anything that significantly influences its profits.
They won't be in favour of banning gambling, for sure.
No, they won't be in favour of doing anything about the fixed odds betting terminals, because the fixed odds betting terminals have become, within a period of 10 years, the most profitable form of gambling, now making a profit for the gamblers at £1.7 billion a year. So that's the political side of it. It's that as much as anything that I'm concerned about.
So let's ask the man himself.
The man himself. First of all, let me say here and now, if people want government to fund problem gambling solutions and remove the burden from the industry, I will take it. I don't believe the services would be as effective. I don't believe that at times of economic crisis, government wouldn't raid the piggy bank. And I'm not sure you'd be as well served. But from a pure financial perspective, if people want us to stop funding GamCare, stop funding Gordon Moody, stop funding all the research, come up with something else. But in the absence of anything else, it strikes me as farcical to accuse us of malevolence in that way. I'm actually very proud of what we do, and I think if other industries funded and contributed towards their externalities in the way we do, we'd be in a better place in a number of other areas. On the question of advertising, like I say, they don't advertise high street bookies, which I represent, so I haven't particularly got a vested interest. But I do, I think the advertising, and I stand by my comments, gambling advertising subsidises your Sky subscription, it subsidises your BT subscription. Remove it and you will pay more. That's simple, and if you want to do that, that's fine, it can be done. On the issue of gambling and is it a vice, I think it has been there since time immemorial, and illegal gambling worries me hugely. And I think having an environment where you can spot and identify those who may be coming into risk. And I think technology will help us in doing that over time, is broadly positive. So having a legal gambling environment is vital. People talk about shop numbers. There's an article, I think it dates from about 1961, before gambling was legalised, where they reckoned there were 1,200 illegal gambling dens in Glasgow. There are now, I think, 900 shops in Glasgow. So, a shop is regulated, pays tax, isn't prone to money lenders, etc., or you can have illegal gambling. The idea you can just, that you get some form of prohibition concerns me greatly.
Okay, so I'm
not
going to
arguing for prohibition, though. More regulation
No, the
isn't going to
question was asked
drive
about the
people
moral
underground
question.
to problem gambling. As I
I'm responding to the question over there, which was the moral question. Do you believe that there is inherently gambling and that it's inherently negative? I'm saying it's just there. Fine.
So I'm going to go to Hilary, and then I'm going to come out to the audience, so get ready.
So I guess as a professional measurer of risk, it's not unreasonable for me to return to this question of risk. And I did just want to kind of point up an inconsistency. I don't want to necessarily say I have an answer to why society views these things inconsistently. But I talked earlier about the fact that you do see more and more kind of colonisation of everyday life by gambling, where somebody said in the audience, people see when people don't have any real way to understand the world, they see a chance, a kind of roll of the dice, or a go at X Factor, or whatever, as good a way of allocating resources as any other, because they don't see any rational way to do it. So on that level, society seems to kind of embrace chance. So that you've got that at one side of the equation. but quite inconsistently, I work in the field of pensions. In the field of pensions now, pension schemes are more and more unwilling to take any risk with the investment of their assets. So all the stuff you've seen in the newspapers about massive deficits in pension schemes, the reason those massive deficits exist is because pension scheme trustees are being encouraged to buy more and more bonds that give you a zero rate of return. They're not risky, they don't give you any risk, but they don't give you any return either. They're a return-free risk, not a risk-free return. And so because pension schemes are doing that, they are creating massive deficits. But that's because in that sphere, there's a real unwillingness of anybody to take any risk. And you can see it in other spheres too, things like trying to make a decision over Heathrow. So at that level, society is utterly unwilling to accept any level of risk. Yet in other areas, it seems to really embrace chance. And that seems to me to be not a sign of a healthy society.
Okay, so I'm going to add to the audience. I'm going to encourage you to keep your questions, points, as pithy as possible.
Can I just ask, there seems to be a bit of a tension between the rights of the individual and the wants of the individual and the effects, the broader effects upon society and the impact. Because you could say, well, if an individual wants to spend all their money and sell their house and all the rest of it to pay for gambling, then as that individual, they should have the right to do it. On the other hand, as with passive smoking and all the rest of it, there is a broader impact both on the immediate environment. My father was a bit of a gambler. There's an impact in different ways upon the kind of immediate social environment and in the broader social environment. And what is the kind of balance? I mean, Mark seems to be at one extreme, and you seem to take the view, well, you know, if I want to spend all my money and I take the risk, I take the consequences of it, then so be it. But that very, very individualistic kind of bubble attitude, I'm living in my own bubble, and you know, whether it has an effect on anybody else, it is really neither here nor there. I think it's kind of at one extreme of this. What would the panel's kind of view be in terms of getting this balance between the wants of the individual and the needs of those people who that individual and society has an impact upon?
Hi, I'm James. I'm fairly undecided on all the other issues, but I just wanted to gauge the panel's views on some of the predatory pricing pursued by the gambling industry. So cut price odds for new customers, and then when you do eventually take one of those cut price odds or a free bet, you find that you have to gamble much more in order to unlock the rewards. To me, this could look like a drug dealer offering cut price drugs initially before trying to lead them on something else. So yeah, I'd just be interested in your thoughts.
Thank you. I think the analogy with drugs is very interesting because I think the idea. I mean, I know Ray Winston may not seem glamorous, but he is a brand, and he's a geezer brand. Yeah. And so he's a geezer that's and always seen as a geezer that was on the side of right in a very rough way. Yeah. And so he's being used. So I am worried about the advertising. I think that you are encouraging a generation to consume what in fact is an activity. There's no end product. You don't eat it. You don't smoke it. What you do is you get involved in a sequence of engagements where that itself, the activity itself, is what you're paying for. And that escalates to the point where some people, not all people, but some people find that their debt is increased. They are getting to debt, and it's the debt that is actually a commodity that drives the continuous addiction.
I mean, I think someone made a point about cut price, offering better deals for new customers. I mean, that's pretty much a marketing initiative that loads of organisations do, not just betting. I mean, that's a pretty standard way of getting someone in. Whether it's go to Oasis and you get this card now, get this credit card now, we give you 20% off what you buy. I mean, that's a pretty standard thing that most people do. So to kind of like say to gambling organisations, that's a kind of equivalent to drug dealers. You wouldn't say that about clothing, shops on the high street. So I do think that there is a double standard there. On the question that the lady just said about, what do you get from gambling? I go and play poker at a casino, and there's two types of poker that you can play. You can enter a tournament or you can play cash. If you enter a tournament, it's a fixed price for entering that tournament. And that can be £10, it could be 15, it could be 25, 50, whatever it is. If you get knocked out, you can buy back in again if that's what you choose to do. But if you don't, then and what can happen is that 20 quid, can last you 6-7 hours of enjoyment, even if you don't end up taking any money home with you. And I have to say that's one of the I might be sad. But that's one of the ways that I seek to get my enjoyment. I don't get drunk. I can drive home afterwards. I don't have to. I'm not like out nightclubbing and getting drunk and then having to get a taxi afterwards. And people make a decision about. How, I mean, the gentleman there said about he spends 10% of his disposable income on gambling. I'm quite impressed that you kind of worked it out that way. That kind of shows that not many people say I spend 10% of my disposable income on going out for meals or whatever. It's an activity where people get enjoyment from it. I certainly get enjoyment from doing it. I have to say, to get to a casino, it's not the sort of thing that you run into. Most of them are kind of down off down the sides, and you have to kind of drive to them and everything else. So, I do think there is a different, poker, gambling, going to a casino. It's a different attitude towards things like that, than going out and getting drunk and going clubbing. And I do think there are double standards that are applied, to those activities. In actual fact, I spend far less of my income on something like that than I would do, on going out and getting drunk.
I had a question for Malcolm, actually. So I was interested in what kinds of interventions or treatments are being investigated for people who are on the brink of developing a serious gambling addiction, who, like the people that members of the audience have been talking about.
So now, panel, I'm going to come back to you for your final remarks. So we'll start with Mark, then we'll go to John, Hilary, then Jim, and then Malcolm. So Mark.
Well, I suppose I should address this gentleman's point about the sort of individualistic, sod everybody else, I'll do what I want with my money. That's not quite my attitude. It is in part my attitude. I've designed a certain risk tolerance. I don't gamble 90% of my disposable income. I'm put more into my pension than I put into gambling. I don't have any kids, so I don't have a specific financial responsibility there. But I've organised my portfolio of assets in such a way that I am confident I won't, if you like, let anybody down. That allows me a certain degree of flexibility on what I spend my spending money on. And rather like this gentleman here, I spend most of my annual leave in Las Vegas. I play Texas Hold'em no limit poker. I find it a very enjoyable leisure experience. I prefer being somewhere foreign, makes it more of an adventure than going to the Grosvenor Casino, Leicester Square. It seems to me, from my perspective, a completely, I hope nobody considers that an unacceptable lifestyle for me to take. It is not as if I am leaving the bill with anyone else at all. So I think that's the right. On the technology point, and how do we track these things? Yeah, I think it is. Of course there is a balance. I haven't. Yeah, I'm not spending all of my money on football and then expecting you to bail me out when I can't afford my mortgage. So I've taken a balanced approach to my portfolio such that I know that others are not going to have to bail me out, either family or the state.
No, we've not got time.
On the technology point, I don't know the details. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know the details of how you treat it. But it seems to me that rather than banning Ray Winston, who I think we've now all agreed is apparently this unbelievably seductive icon for all men between the ages of 20 and 50, and presumably therefore when he finishes each advert with saying, "and I gamble responsibly," that's brainwashing all people in the East End of London to brainwash responsibly, because those are the precise words that pass his lips. I think rather than focusing on these rather obvious things, ban Ray Winston before 9 o'clock or whatever, there's too many shops on Newham High Street, I think there are some potentially really interesting technological solutions. Let me give an example. I don't use it anymore because I don't tend to play poker online, but there's a poker tool called SharkScope. And the idea is you plug in your system and this website will work out how well or badly you've done against certain opponents, certain stakes and certain different types of poker play. You can pull up all of the graphs, it's like doing your complex annual accounts for a FTSE 100 company if you really wish to use it to its maximum. It strikes me that that's exactly the sort of charts that you could use to see, not just for yourself, but others could use to see, are you actually flying off the edge? If you're losing a lot of money between midnight and 3 in the morning, most likely you're drunk. Okay? If your stakes have gone up massively between midnight and 3 in the morning, you're gambling at £5 stakes during the day, but £200 stakes at 2 in the morning, something is going wrong. All of that data is there. Now, I'm not emphatically not suggesting that that should be sort of handed over to the state. I'm just saying that these are potential tools in which we can pick up these problems earlier and then seek expert advice to divert people away before they actually hit rock bottom. They may have lost a few £100, but they might not have actually lost their house. So let's harness the new technologies rather than going for the old sort of ban this, ban that approach to try and knock people into shape.
Okay, John.
This has been a fascinating debate, and I think that the heart of this debate is that the balance between personal freedom and the role that the state or regulators may play in this. And I said this already. I think it's been unfortunate that there wasn't somebody, a government or regulatory figure, who could kind of answer their lack of inaction, because I think there has been a march to deregulation here with gambling, which it's the opposite direction to what's happened, looking into diabetes and alcohol addiction, and the lack of government money that is spent on this is a crying shame. And in response, the gambling industry says, well, if you want to get rid of pre-watershed ads, then you're going to have to pay more. How have we got to this point where they're kind of saying, well, if you want to get rid of that, you're going to have to pay more? And I think that's been a failure on the part of the government to do this. And the 2007 gambling bill has a lot to answer for on that point. Again, I'm speaking as a dad. I remember, as I said at the start, I remember my dad going into betting shops and me hanging around outside. It wasn't all that nice. And actually, this debate has brought up a huge, surfeit of emotion. I didn't realise that was kind of there. It's kind of really tapped into something. And speaking now as a father, I think it's really important that, these ads should be regulated during the day. Kids shouldn't be bombarded with these, just as you wouldn't expect them to be bombarded with, young children with violence or graphic sex. The other thing that I want to make, as I said at the start, this is a growing problem. I think you mentioned, Malcolm, that it's one cohort being swapped with another. We're fixing a bunch of guys and then there's another cohort going in. The Gambling Commission said this is a growing problem. So this isn't something that is static and is something that's been managed. This is getting worse and it has the potential to get worse.
Yes, I'm conscious of time, so 2 very quick points, although I kind of wish I'd made the first one earlier, which is just around bingo, because bingo is one of those kind of good gambling things these days. And I think you can make quite a good argument about that as a pastime very much like any other, which I think was also one of the things that was at one point subject to a 24-hour cooling off period. So, I did want to speak out a little bit for the idea of having a bit of a good time doing an activity. I kind of wanted to disagree with the idea that paying for an activity that's not a very tangible thing isn't worth very much. I have to say, when I go to the football, I go for, I don't take away anything with me really. I go for the testosterone rush you get in the stands. I go for the opportunity to watch what's been some pretty mediocre football at Old Trafford for the past 3 years, although hopefully we've turned a corner. But I don't really take anything very tangible away. And I don't think that should be a reason to kind of sniff at that kind of spending. I have to say, I'd be a bit scared to work out what percentage of my disposable income I spend on going there, and a few pints and a curry and the transport. So I'm probably not going to go there. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Jim.
Yes, I think this issue of the balance, it's sort of free, are people free to do what they want, or should we regulate what people are doing, I think is an absolutely central issue running through all that we've been saying, really. But it's an issue which society has about anything which is potentially dangerous. I mean, we deal with cars by getting a balance. We don't put people on the road behind a wheel without quite a lengthy training and test. We have all sorts of regulations about how to use a motor vehicle. It's the same with firearms. I mean, we have a very different position from the United States, but there's not a total ban on people having firearms, but we have very, very close regulations around it. So everything which is potentially dangerous. And I think it is like clothing. I mean, I think one's got to recognise that this is potentially a dangerous activity, gambling. We've always known that. It's always been dangerous. It's not like clothing, and and my argument is that we've really, over the last few years, things have moved steadily in a direction where we've got the balance wrong, and we're always having to get the balance in the right place with regard to something potentially dangerous. And I think it's going and has gone really quite badly wrong. And I think the gambling industry now is really under a lot of pressure about this. And I have heard people in the gambling industry say that really the fixed odds betting terminals, the advertising that parents are noticing and thinking is bad for their children, is really doing reputational damage to the gambling industry. And the gambling industry really is being looked at now, and people really are asking the question. The very fact that there's a debate here at this weekend means that it is under observation. And I think this question of the balance between freedom and so on, in the 2007 and 2010 big gambling surveys that were done, the government no longer funds them, it says it hasn't got enough money to fund them. We introduced questions for the first time about the public's attitude. So we asked a number of questions of the whole sample, 7,000 or 8,000 people, what their attitudes were. And it was quite clear that the vast majority of people are not in favour of gambling prohibition. It's not a question. People don't want prohibition of gambling, but what they do want is they want sufficient control on it that it's recognised as being a potential public health issue, and that the balance is restored in the right place. And I would certainly recommend that we do something about advertising earlier, advertising when children are exposed with their parents, sports sponsorship. I would certainly do something about the fixed odds betting terminals, and the government, I think, is of a mind possibly to do something about them, either to reduce the stake from £100 down to the £2, which you get for all other types of slot machine, or to take them out of betting shops altogether. The inducements that I think were mentioned, I think the idea, if you think it's an ordinary commodity like anything else, of course you would say, yes, of course the industry is going to induce you to sign a contract with an online betting company, or to give you free bets to start with. Who wouldn't do that? But it's not an ordinary commodity. It really isn't like clothing and other things. It is potentially a problem. So I think we've got the balance wrong, and I think we need to restore the balance so that we get it back to something that gets a much better balance between the individual freedom and protection of individuals.
Malcolm.
Probably focus just on the question about interventions, or what kind of interventions, because, you'll hear Jim talk about taking us back, and I'm not sure I've ever been particularly interested in going back. I think I'd rather look forward. Technology offers quite significant opportunities. At the most basic level, Jim know this, you can spot on a fixed odds betting machine, a terminal, or indeed online betting, types of behaviour that indicate a person may be prone to harm. Chasing losses is a very common way of doing it. Increased staking. We do maintain, or we are able to, and increasingly able to maintain, significant data about an individual's betting history, patterns, average staking. And through that, it is becoming increasingly possible, as opposed to sort of the standard poster in a betting shop which says, gamble responsibly, to say, well, actually, in Bradford, the average person only spends 10 minutes on a machine and stakes £8.50. You've just spent half an hour and staked, £250. And that technology is coming. I'm not pretending for a moment at the moment it's perfect, We're trialling it, all of my members are trialling it with people who have accounts because we can monitor them better. Betting shops are an anonymous environment, so we have to think about what we can do as well with anonymous play. About 10% of people use accounts, 90% bet anonymously. Around anonymous play, basically you've got facial recognition technologies are becoming more available. We can tell now, there is a technology, it's readily available. It can spot if someone is likely to be under 18. It can tell sex, ethnicity, age. That gives us a great potential to make sure our age package is there. If we can go further than that and start spotting regular punters and start analysing their play, even though we don't know who the individual is, it has potential for more targeted, individual-specific interventions, right up. On the most basic level, I will say to anyone who's got people with problem gambling, self-exclusion is a lot better than it used to be. You phone one number, you can exclude from all the shops in an area, in a region, near your work, near your home, and it's getting better, and people should just mention that as an aside, that is up and running. So I think looking forward, technology will allow us to personalise and identify people earlier. I think it offers us a really good potential going forward, and I think that, as opposed to the sort of ban this machine, neutralise that, remove this pleasure from the majority who don't have a problem with it, I think is the way I'd like to go. But, you know, that's my view on the world.
So, as ever with the battle of ideas, for me personally, more questions than answers coming from that debate, but that usually means that our speakers have done quite a good job. So can we thank all of them there?